Hi everyone, I'm Samuli Karppinen, gamer name BAITO, given by a caster in a tournament back in the day in Team Fortress 2, literally for baiting teammates on camera in a tournament. I was top 0.0001% in 3 different esports titles as coach and player way back. Now I already feel like it was eternity ago. Since the last 4 years or 5 years, I've spent on building multiple online communities, and the biggest one of these is 25,000 in size, esports Discord of like 700 people as well, and then I've got my own co-op community Discord of 240-ish people right now. So a lot of community building to both clients and just as personal interest, because I love bringing people together. It's not necessarily just about gaming, even though my entire background is there. There's something special when you bring people together and they share an interest. And today, in fact, we are going to talk about community building, and I mainly want to make sure everyone understands the why. That why missing this piece will crumble your entire marketing. So let's get started. The title of today is Trust First, Systems Second. So what you will get from this keynote is what community trust buys for your team, then 3 actions for your next 3 weeks. So we'll actually get practical. This is not for theory. I didn't invent this slideshow for you to just remember things but not do anything. And then we will identify what stage you are at and what's the next system for your stage, or next actions. Take a moment to look at this garden right here. And to build a little trust, I'll tell you that it's generated by Opus 4.7. I don't have this kind of artist skills, and my artist was busy, so this is the part where I used AI, but whenever you do that, you probably want the players to know to not lose the trust you've built with them. Alright, let's start covering this. Feel free to take some screenshots so it's easier to remember afterwards. This garden has 6 garden beds and it has this trust well in the middle. On the far left you can see sentiment on these roses, and what happens there is whenever you're pouring this water, this trust, onto the sentiment garden, your players will publicly give a positive sentiment to you that impacts how your game is reviewed, not by only the players but the wider media, because that talk, the tone of the talk in your community is the first thing when a content creator comes to your community, or when a new member comes to your community, they form their opinion, their sentiment based on what most people in the Discord think. And this is why some games have no forgiveness at all. If their sentiment is already bad and something goes wrong with the launch, the players are ready to abandon you immediately. But if you build trust, you will also get forgiveness thanks to the good sentiment. And whenever people are kind of review bombing you, it's not going to be just on your team members and moderators to deal with those, but people are ready to defend you. And about defending you, the next level of this is the sunflowers right behind there on the left side with advocacy. So this is not you paying someone to do something. This is people from their goodwill, because you've built trust with them, being ready to talk about you to their friends, to even randoms. So people selling you to other people. And what this causes is you no longer have to go to the press and pay to them. You no longer only have to rely on paid creator partnerships, but you are going to attract press and creator interest. Some big game coverers, for example, picking your game trailer up on X just because so many players are talking good about it. And you don't need to have huge distribution yourself. You will organically attract this when people advocate for you. And again, why would they advocate you? Because of that foundation of trust that you've been pouring in this garden bed as well. And with consistent trust, comes loyalty. You see the apple tree at the back. This is how studios have shipped one game with a very established community, with superfan programs, and then they carry that over to their next title. All of you probably know some indie examples of this, where one game has been a huge hit, and that audience who's been deeply engaged in the previous game transfers to the next one. So for your studio's long-term health, getting player loyalty is one of the most valuable business outcomes for sure. Okay, kind of skipping through this fast, and we can later think about more what these mean with these examples that we have coming up. I'm jumping to the participation on the far right. So participation means when you are throwing live events, programs, all kinds of initiatives in your community, do you have to pay people to participate in those? Or do people genuinely want to be a part of what you're doing without you begging them to do it? And when this happens, the onboarding experience for every new player improves simultaneously. I don't know if you're familiar with Sherpa systems, but it's part of the stuff that I coach. So you have different kind of helper systems where you have volunteers who've been super fans in the community, who are ready to jump on moderation, accessibility help, and play testing, all kinds of things, just because they enjoy your product and they trust you. And when you have these things in place, when you have old members teaching the newcomers, suddenly you don't have to pay to make the first time user experience in your community better. But that then in turn increases your retention. So when a new member joins your Discord, does that make them stick to your game for a longer time? Or do they immediately release and they just tried it once, they didn't feel like anyone cared about them at the community, they didn't get help? Or do they actually get useful responses from people in the community? And then this in turn transfers to sales as well. When it's looking lively in your Discord, creators will want to work with you. It's like an instant green flag if you go to a Discord and there's voice chat activity, or there's events going on, there's multiple events in the calendar. That's one of the first things that players are looking at when they're joining game Discords to determine whether or not they're dead, and not limited to game Discords only. But it's a green flag. And talking about green flags, on the back right, you can see UGC, which means user-generated content. And that can be clips, can be art, can be also in-game levels, can be a lot of things. But the main point again is you're not doing a fake campaign to get content. The players themselves, they are, from their goodwill and trust between you and them, they're releasing content just out of their own thought. And then once you have that initial trust and you can see that, oh, they're creating content from our game, at that point you can start thinking about the systems and programs. But in order to even get them to do UGC for you, you need to pour in water to this garden bed, develop trust with them. And that in turn then gives these fruits. Discovery that you didn't pay for happened with one of my clients, that when people started creating organic content, the algorithm picked it up, and suddenly even the game's official trailer was gaining hundreds of thousands of views in a matter of 2 days, just because people started creating that organic content that the algorithm then picked up. Lower acquisition cost for each user is a natural byproduct of this, because you're not paying for the content, but the content is, whether it's from content creators, whether it's from your community, but it's organic and free for you. So this is definitely worth a lot of money, like all of these outcomes, but specifically UGC. And last but not least, the berry bush in the middle there. So we are going to have case examples about this, so I'm not getting stuck for too long. But when you develop deep trust with your players, and especially players who are staying with you for the long term, they start knowing your game better than your devs. Literally, the team of Rock Galactic implied that their long-term testers, community testers, knew their game better than the devs themselves. So you can turn to those people and get higher quality feedback. And because they care so much about your product, it's not just that they quickly give you steps to reproduce bugs. So they're not complaining, they're like legit helping you fix issues that they know that need to be fixed. And also they're helping you avoid the traps of ambition where you're hopelessly trying to do all kinds of features and you don't know what is actually in demand, but they'll guide you, they'll handhold you, and the stronger sense of this pulse in the community you have, not with all your players, but with those players who've been around for the longest and who have like deepest connection with your game, the more money you're going to save in development. So it leads to better game, faster fixes, better feedback in general, and it's one of the most valuable fruits that you can have in your garden of community. So why I began with this picture before we move on to what actually builds trust is I wanted you guys to understand community is not like just another marketing tool or this kind of gimmick. It's worth a lot of money. If you do this right, you're set. You could get all the distribution, you could get all kinds of publisher support, but if you're missing this foundation first, the leverage on top of it is not going to matter. We're going to talk about that later as well, but now allow me to move on to what the trust actually is. And remember to take screenshots if you haven't yet. So, the water in the bucket. I've split this into 4 categories that cover a lot of smaller actions, but these are the big themes. So, show up directly first and foremost. What this means is not just the community manager covering for the entire team. This means that the players have direct contact with the team who's making the game. So even the community manager should not be in some silo alone, but should be next to the production, knowing what's happening under the surface. And the devs themselves, the people developing the game, should be voices and names in the Discord, in your socials, on all surfaces that are facing the players. You need multiple touch points with the community so that the community feels like they are being treated as VIPs. They're not just being put off to some moderator or community manager and never hearing from the devs. Then they would feel like complete outsiders if it's just the bouncer in the door. Bouncer in the doorway telling them like that's their only touch point to the core team. It's not gonna go well. I've seen that firsthand myself. And it makes such a difference when you get to talk to the creators themselves. So there's multiple ways of doing this. I'm not gonna go deep into it, but I'll give you one practical example. Like, imagine a feeling of a content creator streaming your game, or a community member that's super loyal, has been around for a long time, is putting on their Twitch stream, and then the developer themselves goes into the chat and just takes that moment of being present with the players and having a genuine interaction. So this goes beyond all the organized sessions. You can plan your week to have a couple of minutes, even 15 minutes a week for something like this, and that's how you develop super fans. That's what it means to show up directly. And now, going into the second category, reply visibly. Most teams are good at communicating that, hey, we listen to you, but they don't state things clearly, and often it feels like the feedback loops don't get closed. So what did you listen to, and what did you change based on listening to this? Or why did you decline doing changes? What's your reasoning because community gave some clear input? What was done with that input? And this takes a lot of courage. It takes transparency, which we'll go into in the next one. But it's not enough that you decide things between closed doors and don't explain publicly to your players why you're doing what you're doing. When you reply visibly and close feedback loops visibly, it builds immense trust with the players, because let's say I give you feedback and you don't do anything with it. You don't tell me why you don't do anything with it. And I feel like it's completely ignored. Why would I give feedback again? What's my motivation to keep giving feedback if I don't see anything being done with it and no conversation around it. So that's why every now and then would be amazing, even on a Discord chat, sometimes on an AMA, on some kind of touch point directly from the founders or the developers to hear why they're doing what they're doing and giving these receipts that community said this, we shipped this. Community said this, but the reason why we don't do it is da-da-da. And this next one, I think we have a great case coming from Tell the Truth, so I'm not gonna stagger too long on this. But transparency is the big word. And how does that reflect in the vision now, what happened before? So a lot of teams just push forward, they promise something on the roadmaps, and then it doesn't always go to plan. But what happened in between? Often the journey is missing. Like the players only see the outcomes, they don't see the journey because you're not being authentic, you're not telling the truth, you're afraid that because you were wrong about something, now people are gonna like stone you. No. They want to see what's going on in your head, and you need that level of honesty. So that's gonna be in one of our next cases. It's interesting. Now, what does cadence mean? Hold cadence. One word to describe this would be consistency. If people cannot count on your rituals, they don't really like learn to show up at these times, whether it's live events, whether it's rituals that cannot be joined but can be engaged with otherwise. There's multiple examples coming on the rest of the slides, but consistency is the one thing that builds trust incrementally, because if you don't have that consistency, then you're never getting the foundation of trust that you really need. So these are the 4 main elements of building this bucket of water in the first place that you can then carry on these beds. And that's how you get the garden that you saw in the previous slide, by utilizing all 4 of these. You cannot ignore any of these. If you remember one thing from this slide is that you need all 4 of these. If you're ignoring one of these, I'll later show how that goes. But let's jump into an example that I've been eagerly waiting to show you because it's local. This is the first trust case. And I'll begin with my association with this. So 6 years ago or so in Tampere, I was having a kebab with the crew at Allman School, and I was teaching esports there, while this other person was teaching people how to make games. And yeah, this person happened to be a funny guy, humble, smart. I didn't know him personally outside just seeing him at the school, but apparently this same guy, Antti, sold 200,000 copies in the first 10 days of early access of his game with very positive reviews. I'm sure most of you at this point have heard about Road to Vostok. And this case I picked here to show one thing. Community trust can be built through a repeatable ritual. That's it. Antti didn't win because of like some one lucky viral post. He did 16 devlogs, and I've deconstructed what he did in these. These were over like a time period of 4 years. What he did, in simple terms, was that he kept showing up with content that felt honest, honesty first, useful, and consistent. People could follow the journey from the beginning till today. You can literally see the entire journey on YouTube if you go and browse the episodes, and he's also done other things than the devlogs, but the devlogs were like the core thing. What he did in these was simple but very effective. He showed progress, but he also showed constraints. He explained decisions, not just outcomes. Like I told you before, like if you only tell that, okay, this is what we're putting out now, these are the patch notes, but there's never the journey of like how this came to be, what was the decision-making process behind this. It doesn't feel like you're invited on the journey, you're just a customer. But Antti did it differently. He invited feedback, and then he kept improving and closed those feedback loops publicly. For indie teams, the one takeaway from this is that you want to pick one ritual, a high quality one, that your team can sustain and repeat for a very long period of time. Not just 1 month or 6 months, but for a long period of time, until it those 4 years or so. It can be devlogs, weekly development, news, or playtest recap post. The format matters way less than consistency and honesty. Man, I still haven't played the game myself. I'm ashamed to say that. I think this is my only touch point single player in a while. I've been always more focused on multiplayer and co-op, but what Antti did with this is this is a case that every indie team should know. Let's look at another indie case that everyone should know. I'm sure most of you in the audience are familiar with Rock Galactic. Their trust case is a bit different. Let's look at this cycle. This slide is actually taken from Mikhail Akopian, their lead game designer from Ghost Ship Games, from GDC 23 talk. So, when we look at this cycle, this represents like a 2-3 month lap from idea, the shipping, the feedback. And when we look at what happens here, their team has an idea, what cool stuff does the game need? And at this point already, they're getting player comments, critique, memes, ideas. It's feeding on to this idea phase. But then they'll do some prototypes, flesh out concepts, and get community tester feedback from people who've been around for a really long time, and some of these people know their game better than the devs themselves. And then, in development, the new features that kind of pass this test are integrated into the overall game, and again, they get experimental branch, really experienced players' feedback. And then they release, and after the release, there still might be bugs to fix, there's the reviews to deal with, community feedback, like wider community feedback. Remember, these guys have insanely big community in terms of like indie studios. And again, we can talk about loyalty that we mentioned earlier on the garden with Rock Galactic. But why these guys decided to build this kind of system is they knew that the amount of games that they sold on the release was good, but it wasn't enough to keep the studio going. So they decided that they still need to keep selling new things, cosmetics specifically. And what they bought with this kind of cycle is not just time in developing faster, but avoiding developing things that people don't need. When you're in constant touch with this kind of cycle to your community of the most active players who've been around for a really long time, you will avoid building all kinds of useless stuff, and you will find out where the real demand is. So if you would plan to be a live game, I think this is a must. Like, there's so many traps that you can do when you're trying to keep a game alive after the launch that you need to be in constant pulse with your community. And Rock Galactic is a prime example of this, because they have day to day, they have a lot of touch points with the community. The community always knows what's going on because they have a readable roadmap, and they're explaining their decision making. So it's a bit similar to Antti, but it's just a wider team. So not one creator, but multiple creators talking to the community. And again, it's not just the community manager doing all the talking, but it feels like the entire team has put their heart into this and wants to interact with the community. So how can you take advantage of this is start with having one beat in your development cycle with one owner, and then trace the changes happening monthly. So don't just take community feedback and do nothing with it, or like put focus groups and do nothing with it, but give those receipts to your community so that they understand what you took from them and why, and what you didn't take and why. So they feel part of the journey. Right, next up, let's jump into another trust case. My pet hooligan. From these wild examples to my own hands work now. These guys at the most superfan community I've personally seen. 25,000 in the Discord, but that number doesn't really mean anything. The number of superfans is what means something. When I say superfan, I mean these people were so fanatic that if I said, guys, jump off a bridge, someone would jump off a bridge. If I said, okay, can you take a tattoo for that thing? Someone would take a tattoo. Didn't do any of those things. Innocent on that. But the point there is what real superfan means. Now, how did we build this kind of army of superfans? This was a team effort. I think that's why the team managed to do this, because it was a team effort from the beginning. When this project started, the transparency was extremely high. The team went all out on this bi-weekly YouTube AMA production. They took multiple hours from their Friday to set this up every single week. I mean bi-weekly. And this continued for almost 2 years, I believe. During this time, the community, they always knew that the team's gonna be there again. They didn't have to think like, okay, when are we gonna hear about the team? When are we gonna see the progress with the game? No, they could count on this live show being there every single time. And that's just commitment that other teams were not willing to put in, but it's also a commitment that takes a lot of resources. They had a big team, but regardless, committing to something like this bi-weekly, that's taking time off from production itself. So it's a huge investment to community, and that's also why so many superfans came to be. But that wasn't the only thing. This community had a role ladder system, variety of UGC contests and programs, not starting with them, but noticing how many people were creating stuff in the community, whether it's really like next level fan art, whether it's like some real life toys and stuff, whether it's classic UGC clip content. There were so many different things coming without anyone asking that it made total sense to do programs and contests as well, but it never started that way. It started with the trust between the founders and the community. Now, DMs to active members and contributors. This is one of the least scalable things because you want to personalize messages between every single interaction. And how can you personalize messages to 25,000 people? You obviously can't. So you have to choose in the role ladder at what phase is the phase where we will spend our core team's time to message these individuals who are contributing a lot. But that definitely paid dividends. And then another thing that was really fruitful was not only recognizing those members through DMs and spotlights, but when the community was giving some kind of player feedback, truly taking that and integrating it, finding ways to integrate that into the game, not just to show off that we listen, but because the community, they knew the game so well, they genuinely had some great ideas. Like one of the things that actually made the game a lot better was when we had the skateboard feature added into the game for the first time. And this was a third-person shooter, and you added a skateboard into the mix. Previously, all the movement was like vertical jumping and hopping. And then you added a skateboard into the mix. And I remember when I was running these user research playtests and focus groups, people told me that it's not the best feature, but it's the one with the highest potential. For example, the aesthetics, the characters, the environment in the game were often rated 10 out of 10. Meanwhile, the skateboard was the thing that got people really excited about what could be done with it. And then we added a trick system, speed boost meter system, and made it go faster downhill and accelerate when you use the environment. And it became a standout in the game. It fit really well together with the combat, was used in tournament gameplay, creators loved it, and it fit this kind of hooligan spirit of the game. And full credit from that goes to the community for really trying to find out what's best for the game and taking the time to really look at the game in depth and what it could be, instead of just criticizing what it already is. Now, let's look at the impact of personalized attention, but not get stuck in this. This is a big danger because I've spent years on this project, so it's easy to get stuck on the slide. But long-term loyalty, better player feedback, better feature adoption, higher volume and quality of UGC, higher retention in events and launches. These are all impacts of this personalized attention that you got one-to-one. We had AMAs, reverse AMAs, those bi-weekly live shows, tournament events, superfan programs, UGC programs. There were so many things and status given out to individuals that it felt like our moderator team in size at highest would have been like in the hundreds almost. There were so many active superfans, and those felt like they were part of the employees, even though they never were. Although some people were recruited also from the community at different points. Now I want to take a breather, and we've looked at 3 trust cases. So you might wonder, how can you lose trust? It's all on red now. All of these 5 points show lack of something. The first one is a lack of the ritual that people counted on without a replacement. It leaves this kind of void, this longing for interaction with the team, for news from the team, and you don't feel so VIP anymore. But then you occasionally hear from the team on roadmaps and bigger announcements, but it's missing the trustworthiness and the close feeling that you're literally part of the team or part of that kind of one family, the big community. Roadmaps can be very distant if you don't know what's the decision making behind them and where are we on the journey right now. Roadmaps are usually given like once a quarter or once a year, whereas these bi-weekly or weekly touch points, they make you feel like you're part of the journey at all times. It's not so distant. Under-promising is a great antidote. If you're only stuck on roadmaps, at least don't overpromise. Lack of founder to community direct interactions goes to the same bucket as the high transparency, but community managers can sometimes be this kind of prophets between the team and the community and make sure that news still travel. But without having the founders themselves, the creators of the game themselves interacting with the players, again, it feels distant. It's like you want to talk to your friend, but there's another person in between you guys and you cannot talk directly to your friend. It's not much of a friendship. I think this number 4 is one of the most detrimental. Is if you can spot a trend in the community, whether it's from forums like Rock Galactic was literally looking all over Reddit and socials for what the community thought, or whether it's in the Discord, whether it's in your YouTube comments, like Megapong would be a great example of utilizing YouTube comments. If you don't look at that kind of feedback and you never implement anything that the community says, they stop saying stuff. They stop engaging in a positive way, they start complaining more, and your community becomes very fragile instead of loyal. To not get stuck on this further, I'll go to the next slide, but I think we could add this list with at least 10 more things that kill trust, but let's try to focus on the things that build it. Now, this is a question that indies often ask, and might think in your head that this solves everything, which is completely false. Can you use visibility to replace trust? On the left, we have this glass dartboard, and has the names of X Defiant, Concord, Suicide Squad. Could have picked any games that had huge distribution, huge platforms, creators, and IP weight, but I picked these three. They sure had attention spikes. They had a lot of darts thrown on the board, these darts representing players, that they eventually land on their community and player facing surfaces. But it never sticks. The trust is never established, which then results in a lot of marketing money spent, but weak buy-in, fragile sentiment, and fast drop after the first contact. So when you land on this dartboard, almost immediately drops. So it doesn't matter how much money you're gonna pour at it, you need to close shop, and that's exactly what happened to X-Defiant and Concord both in swiftly. Now then look at the right side, more traditional dartboard. With Deep Rock Galactic, Road to Vostok, and Megabonk. They start small. They have some level of distribution in the beginning. Not much, but some. But as the weeks go on, as time passes, when you travel down this right side of the slide, you notice that it's flourishing. The community is actually full of players that weren't there in the first weeks, but later after the launch, the traffic is huge because every single player that comes in wants to tell about this treasure they found to other players. It's built on community trust. This is not built on huge distribution. And the point that you have to remember from this slide is that trust is the foundation that you are going to place any leverage on. Leverage without trust is meaningless. So don't think that you finding a publisher and completely ignoring your community is going to solve anything. For a moment, you will get potentially money to build your game further, but if you don't care about your community, if you genuinely don't want to give them attention and are not going to establish that trust, it's all for nothing. So I'm telling this to you before you find a publisher, start building the trust. And then when you get the leverage, when you find a publisher for your team, you can put that leverage on the trust. Now we've talked about trust building for a good while, and we should move on to scaling. So what do you need to prove before starting to build systems? You need 2 out of 3 of these 3 things. Repeat engagement means same people returning for whatever rituals and beats you're putting together, whatever events you're putting together, launches. If the drop-off is as big as on the dartboards in the previous slide, then there's no point in starting to scale because you don't have that trust to put together any programs. Trust response. Do the players feel heard, or is your chat full of people complaining? And here it's important to notice, most of the time, the biggest complainers are also, the loudest people in the community. So you need to spot where is the sentiment coming from. Is it balanced, or is it truly negative sentiment? But if you have a positive sentiment, players feel heard, you can clearly see it. Pre-launch traction. This is about the goodwill that I mentioned earlier. So is your community initiating things without being asked to? Do you have creator momentum outside the paid campaigns? Or if you pay some creator, do they want to cover you for free afterwards because they like you so much? If more than one is weak, I would focus on trust building first. Because again, trying to build systems, trying to, for example, do a UGC contest when you don't really have any trust in the community, it's hard to pick up pace. I'll let you observe these 5 scalable systems while I take a breather. If I was to break them down in a simple way, recurring rituals Earlier we saw the example of devlogs. A lot of teams decide to host monthly play with the devs. Some host weekly town halls. Maybe they don't have a build to show yet, but they still want to talk about the game with their players, about concepts. When you're further down the line, a lot of devs streaming on a weekly basis to get their community's input in the chats, especially now that a lot of studios are influenced highly or even led by creators. This will become a more popular option. But rituals are things that people can count on. Some of them people can join, other ones people can engage with. But are they consistent and are they systemized? None of that really matters until you have the trust. First, you need trust so that people actually care about what you're doing. Then you can do multiple rituals a week and systemize them and start using outside help and have a little bit less of direct founder work in those inputs. One example of this is, let's say your team is extremely busy on production, but you have a community manager and they are putting some kind of weekly content beat out that has input from the team, but it only might take a couple of minutes. But that's at the phase where your community already knows the founding team, the devs behind the game, and the trust is established. Then you can make those touch points systemized so that the effort from the developer side is smaller to pull this off. Superfan and loyalty programs. The Sherpa system, I touched on that earlier a bit, I believe, helping with the onboarding of the newcomers and veteran players teaching newer players. Trained volunteers. There's so many different things that can have volunteers, whether it's localization, accessibility, or even moderators. You might think that all the biggest gaming discords that they have some pro moderators who are extremely high paid, but no. Oftentimes it's fully volunteers who they've given their heart out for the game, for the team, and they've expressed their interest to become volunteers for the game's community because they live in there. UGC systems, I touched on this earlier. The one thing I would add is the organic top performers input to ads. We did this with MyBet Hooligan and found some really good conversions on the wishlists and into the community when we had some creators from the community, small creators, do some great content, and then we leveraged that, and we also created content together with the creators from the community and leveraged that on the main account, and we found 2.5 million views across 3 different videos, all of them with that amount or more, doing this kind of trend, because we found that it's organically performing, and we put it to ads, and we found some great conversions. I think that doing ads without proving them first organically can be a huge waste on the PC side. You want to make sure that the content that you're putting into ads actually lands. I don't know anything about mobile marketing, don't ask me about that. It's a totally different ballgame. Moving on to playtesting, it's my favorite child. Think that you can get really creative once you have community trust, once you can request players to be at a certain place at a certain time and they will show up. You can look at your needs and even on a weekly basis identify where do we need player input, whether it's from new players or from veteran players. And you just need to have people who understand user research in-house or externally. But the basis of this is the community trust, because if you're going to do playtesting with external players without having people from your community and utilizing them for every single test, it's gonna get really expensive. So I can say this, I've run a lot of tests for free with players from the community for a lot of these different type of tests, and they've been very fruitful. Sometimes even the game director My Pet Hooligan requested ideas on specific topics, solving specific problems, and we could bring on the veteran players to brainstorm, and I'm sure Deep Rock Galactic has utilized the same concepts, knowing how much they trust their long-term players. Automation and docs I'm gonna keep short, but there's a lot of time-saving systems and tools you can put in place in your Discord, but if you don't have the trust, then it feels almost robotic. If your community is still small or mid-sized and you're building all these systems, it feels very distant and it's lacking that VIP treatment. So the best example of this is if you're hosting an event in your community that's a live event where people want to come to play with you or talk with you. In the beginning, when you have those 20 to 30 people that will show up, you can send them all personalized messages and make sure that they feel seen and they feel invited and welcome to your event. But at the point when you're getting hundreds or thousands of people in your events, you can't really personalize that amount of messages anymore, and you have to rely on systems and instructions. And Discord bots are definitely a great thing. So are GameWiki, FAQ. Let's move on to the last slides. I see that we're almost running out of time otherwise, but I heard luckily that we can extend just a bit. This is the second last slide, but might be the most important for you. So digest this for a second. Here is where you pick your honest column. One of these stages is where your team is currently at. Stage 1, people notice you, you're visible. Stage 2, people believe us, so you've established some trust. Stage 3 is participation, people play with us. This requires a lot more trust than the previous stage. And then this kind of rarer extreme, but is the one that you want to strive for, is people selling you to others. Advocacy, stage 4. And the final form in my head of community is not just people selling you, but people literally building with you. And there's many ways to co-create with you, whether it's directly inside your game or through very active feedback, through active help that we described in the earlier slides. So the metrics, I won't go through all of them, but I'll explain that the metrics are like the mirror here. You look at, do we have this metric? When I look in the mirror, does this look like us? Is this accomplished? And I'll open up some that might not be so understandable. Public receipts/month means exactly closing those feedback loops and then publicly saying that you said this and that's why we did this. And I saw most recently Arc Riders do this really well. They had this very clean structure in their community announcements of giving these public receipts to the community because their community is extremely loud and you need to spot that signal and then do something about it, not just ignore it. And the way they communicated to the players was like, I could clearly see from their bigger message that this is the main point they want to land. To develop that trust with the players. Sure, you could put a lot of this into automated messages and automated copy, but even though it's a Discord message, if you really put thought into what has the community said, and as human beings, how would they like to be treated after they've signaled this thing? And then you respond like a human, it can pay dividends, even though you can't do these receipts all the time as a smaller studio. Every time you have the chance to make even a tiny change towards the direction where community wants, you definitely want to do the receipts as well. Because if you only change stuff, but the community doesn't feel that you listen to them, that you change something because of them, it's a missed opportunity. I think all the other slots are quite self-explanatory, and we are a bit on overtime, so I'm not getting stuck on them too much, but the actions 1 and 2 are meant for you to jump to the next stage. So if you're currently stuck in visibility, so people notice you and you're doing something right now, but it's maybe not consistent. Maybe people notice you, but nothing is converting into your community or wish lists. You could optimize your public-facing assets, whether that be Steam page and socials, for example. And you could do one really consistent visibility beat to then build the trust needed to get your community to stage 2. And with every stage comes actions that will help you get to the next stage. Like for example, with participation, doubling team to player interactions is a method that first you've recognized the people who are participating and therefore encourage them to participate more. You spotlight them, you make them feel this status in the community, and then your team can come land those messages to the community or be more present. And you already know your community is participating in events. Why not make those events leave them with this feeling of being treated like VIPs? So if you know that, hey, our community manager is throwing this event on Saturday, or for example that you are the community manager yourself, if you know that there's going to be attendance, there's going to be a chance to turn some people into superfans, bring one of the creators behind the game in there. If you don't want it to be the same person every time, which is completely fair, take turns on who should come there with the community. They don't have to organize the event, but if they can come there even for half an hour, the players will remember the treatment they get directly with the game developer. Right, remember to take a screenshot of this as well, since we don't have the time to go through all of them. So, to finish off the talk, your team's next 3 weeks, you need to spot where you are and then start doing one trust action you repeat weekly. You need a named owner for this. Who's going to be doing this trust action? Or is it going to be people taking turns? One trust action that's very manual, that you repeat weekly. So carrying the water. One system experiment to test. We talked about the different systems 2 slides ago, and you don't yet potentially know what stage you're at. You might need help with identifying that, or if you're even ready for a system experiment. But most of you, if you have a community, you can also experiment with a small system. It doesn't have to be the full commitment. And with systems, it's also good to always read the room. If you are not far enough yet, and you put a system from like stage 5, stage 4, the chances are that it doesn't stick, that you don't get the engagement that you want. But you can experiment with systems depending on your stage. And one public we listened update as the third thing. And these are the receipts. These are shipping things that community has voiced or telling what's happening in the development because of what community said. I could go on about these things for hours, so I want to enter the questions and answers phase. And thank you everyone for tuning in on this monologue of mine. I'm eagerly waiting for your questions. And if you want to book coaching or operational support, then add me on Discord with the nickname BAITO, because I live there. I don't really live on LinkedIn or any other medias. I'm most of the time chronically online on Discord because that's where communities live. Then occasionally on Reddit and socials. But the best way to reach me is this. Now let's enter the stage where you guys can come here to ask some questions.